February 2nd, 1965, Chicago is gripped by a midwinter chill. But inside the McCormick Place Convention Center, things are heating up. It's the annual sporting goods show, a chaotic mix of hunters, fishermen, and athletes. In the center of the archery exhibit stands a man who commands the room. He's 38 years old, barrel-chested, and possesses a booming voice that carries over the crowd. He wears a black eye patch over his left eye, giving him the look of a modern-day pirate. To the people of Omaha, Nebraska, this is John Fritz Johnson. He's a local celebrity, a TV sports director, and a man known for his wild stunts and eccentric personality. But as Fritz pulls back the string of a composite bow to demonstrate his aim, a man in the crowd stops dead in his tracks. He isn't looking at the bow, he's looking at the face. He turns to a young woman standing nearby, Suzanne Pica. Suzanne is 21 years old and hails from Akron, Ohio. The man whispers to her, "Suzanne, look at that man. Doesn't he look like your Uncle Larry?" Suzanne looks. Her heart drops. Her Uncle Larry Bader had been dead for 8 years. He had vanished in a terrifying storm on Lake Erie in 1957. His boat had been found, but his body never was. He had been legally declared dead in 1960. But as she watches this Fritz Johnson laugh and joke with the crowd, the resemblance is haunting. The ears, the chin, the way he carries his shoulders, it's identical. Suzanne walks up to the man with the eye patch. The room seems to go silent in her mind. "Pardon me," she says, her voice trembling, "but aren't you my Uncle Larry Bader?" The man turns, looks at her with his one good eye, and lets out a warm, confused laugh. "Honey, I don't know who you are, but I've never been to Akron in my life. My name is Fritz Johnson." That moment, that single interaction, set off a chain reaction that would collapse 2 families, baffle the American medical establishment, and spark a mystery that remains unsolved to this day. Was this a miracle of the human mind, or the most cold-blooded vanishing act in history? Welcome back, or if you're new here, welcome to Hidden by Night. We cover all the things that live in the dark, so settle in, grab your snacks, and make sure to keep your flashlight close. In today's video, we are deep diving the case of Larry Bader, a man whose life split into 2 one fateful day. Let's start with where it all began. Akron, Ohio, in the mid-1950s. Lawrence Joseph Bader, known to everyone as Larry, was a definition of an average American man. He was a veteran of the Navy, a member of the local Knights of Columbus, and a successful salesman for the Wherever cookware company. He was married to Mary Lou. They had 3 young children, and by the spring of 1957, Mary Lou was pregnant with their 4th. From the outside, Larry was the pillar of his community. As we peel back the layers of Larry's life, we find a man who was quietly drowning. Larry Bader was a man of expensive tastes. He liked his gadgets, he liked the latest gear, and he liked to live just a bit beyond his means. By 1957, that bit had grown into a mountain. He was roughly $20,000 in debt. In today's money, that is nearly $250,000. But it wasn't just bank loans. Larry had stopped paying his taxes. The IRS was beginning to circle. For a man in the 1950s suburbia, the shame of financial ruin was often worse than the ruin itself. He was a man under immense silent pressure. On May 15, 1957, Larry told Mary Lou he needed to clear his head. He was going to drive up to Lake Erie for a quick fishing trip. He kissed her goodbye, patted her pregnant belly, and promised to be home in time for dinner. When Larry arrived at the Rocky River boat dock, the sky was already bruised purple. The Lake Erie weather is notoriously fickle. It is the shallowest of the Great Lakes, meaning it can go from a mere flat surface to 10-foot swells in a matter of minutes. The dockmaster, a man accustomed to the lake moods, warned Larry not to go out. A small craft advisory had been issued. Gale-force winds were expected. Larry, usually a cautious man, brushed the warning off. He rented a 14-foot plywood boat and a small outboard motor. He pushed off into the choppy water, a solitary figure against the gray horizon. That night, the storm hit with a vengeance. It was the kind of gale that tore branches from trees and sent waves crashing over the breakwaters. The next morning, the lake was eerily calm. A search party found Larry's boat drifting near Perkins Beach. It was a haunting sight. One oar was missing. There was a small jagged hole in the plywood hull. Inside the boat were Larry's fishing tackle, his coat, and his gear, but Larry was gone. The Coast Guard spent days scouring the shoreline. They used planes, boats, and divers. They found nothing. No body ever surfaced, which isn't entirely unusual for Lake Erie, but there was no witnesses either. In Akron, the news was devastating. Mary Lou was left a widow with 3 children and a 4th one on the way. For 3 years, she held out a sliver of hope, but eventually the reality of the debt and the missing body led a judge to declare Larry Bader legally dead in 1960. Mary Lou received a life insurance payout, about $39,000, and began the long, painful process of rebuilding her life. She eventually met a new man and made plans to remarry. Larry Bader was a memory, a tragedy, and a name on a headstone in an empty plot. But while Akron was mourning Larry, 700 miles away in Omaha, Nebraska, a man had just appeared out of thin air. Just 4 days after Larry Bader vanished into the storm, a man walked into a bar in downtown Omaha. He was gregarious, he was loud, and he introduced himself as John Fritz Johnson. Fritz had no luggage, he had no identification. He claimed he had no memory of how he had arrived in Omaha. But unlike a man in a panic, Fritz seemed to embrace his blank slate. He didn't sulk in the shadows, he did the exact opposite. Fritz Johnson decided to become the most famous man in Omaha. He took a job as a bartender, then moved into radio. He had a natural booming voice and a charisma that was magnetic. He became a stunt journalist. His most famous act? He climbed to the top of a flagpole in the middle of the city and stayed there for 30 days to raise money for polio. He had food and water hoisted up to him. He broadcast his radio show from the sky. He became a local hero. By the early 1960s, Fritz was a sports director for KETV7. He was a household name. He didn't drive a normal car. He drove a 1951 Pontiac hearse. He painted it, put a bar in the back, and installed an incense burner. He was the complete antithesis of Larry Bader, the quiet cookware salesman. He also started a new family. He met a woman named Nancy Zimmer. They fell in love, got married, and had 2 children of their own. Fritz was a devoted father and a pillar of the Omaha community. Then came the headaches. In 1964, Fritz began suffering from excruciating pain behind his left eye. Doctors discovered a malignant tumor. To save his life, they had to remove the eye. Fritz didn't let it slow him down, though. He slapped on a black eye patch and went right back on the air. He joked that it made him look more distinguished. He was at the height of his fame when he agreed to go on that archery show in Chicago in February 1965. He was there to represent a bow manufacturer. He was there to be Fritz Johnson. He had no idea that his brothers were already on their way to Chicago carrying old photographs and a set of fingerprints. When the police in Chicago finally convinced Fritz to sit down for a fingerprint test, he did so with a smirk. He was confident. He told them they were wasting their time. The results came back an hour later, and the prints of Fritz Johnson were an identical match to the military records of Lawrence Joseph Bader. The news hit like a physical blow. In Omaha, Nancy Johnson was told her husband was a dead man from Ohio with another wife and 4 other children. In Akron, Mary Lou was told her late husband was a TV star in Nebraska with a new wife and 2 more kids. But the most shocked person in the room was Fritz himself. He sat in the station staring at his own fingerprints and reportedly whispered, "What have I done to these women?" The legal fallout was a nightmare. Since Larry was alive, his marriage to Nancy was technically bigamy and therefore void. Mary Lou's insurance money was now considered a fraudulent payout. The IRS wanted their back taxes from 1957. Larry, or Fritz, was taken to the University of Nebraska for intense psychiatric evaluation. This is where the story moves from a crime mystery into a medical anomaly. For 10 days, doctors poked and prodded his mind. They used true serum, which is just sodium amytal, to lower his inhibitions. They put him under deep hypnosis. In these states, a person typically cannot maintain a lie. The doctors asked him, "Who is Mary Lou?" Fritz replied, "I don't know." They showed him pictures of his Akron children. He looked at them with the curiosity of a stranger. He felt no bond. He maintained, under the strongest drugs available, that his life began in Omaha in 1957. The lead psychiatrist, Dr. Robert Wigton, eventually reached a startling conclusion. He believed Larry was suffering from a dissociative fugue. This was a rare condition where a person, under extreme stress, literally breaks from their identity. Their brain wipes the slate clean and constructs a new personality to survive. But the skeptics were vocal. Was it a fugue state, or was the Larry Bader just the greatest actor the world had ever seen? When the fingerprints results came back, the world of Fritz Johnson didn't just change, it fractured. He was no longer just a local celebrity, he was a legal anomaly. The state of Ohio, the state of Nebraska, the IRS, and multiple insurance companies all wanted a piece of a man who claimed he didn't even know who he was. First, there was a matter of his wives. In the eyes of the law, in 1965, Larry's marriage to Mary Lou in Akron was still valid because he had never actually died. This meant his marriage to Nancy in Omaha was technically bigamous. Nancy, who had supported Fritz through his cancer and eye surgery, was devastated. She was suddenly told her marriage was a sham and her children's legal status was in question. Then came the money. The insurance company that had paid out $39,500 to Mary Lou, roughly $400,000 in today's money, sued to get it back immediately. But Mary Lou didn't have it. She had spent it over the years raising their 4 children. The Social Security Administration also halted the survivor benefits they had been paying the family for years. Mary Lou, who had finally found some stability and was planning to marry a man named Ronald Griffith, found her life frozen. She couldn't marry Ronald because she was still legally married to a ghost who was now a TV star in Nebraska. Meanwhile, the IRS was waiting at the door. They hadn't forgotten the thousands in unpaid taxes from 1957. To the tax collectors, amnesia wasn't a valid excuse for tax evasion. They saw a man who had successfully dodged his debt for 8 years, and they wanted their pound of flesh. Through all of this, Fritz remained defiant. He stayed in Omaha, but he was forced off the air. He couldn't represent the station while under investigation for bigamy and fraud. He spent his days in legal depositions, often growing frustrated. When lawyers would ask him about Larry's childhood or Larry's debts, he would snap back, "I don't know that man. You're asking me about a stranger." As the legal battles raged through 1965 and into 1966, Fritz's body began to fail him again. The cancer that had cost him his left eye hadn't been fully defeated. It had gone into hiding, and now it was back with a vengeance. By the summer of 1966, the tumor had spread to his liver. The flamboyant man who had once sat on a flagpole for 30 days was now confined to a hospital bed in Omaha. Even as his physical strength ebbed away, the mystery of his identity remained at the forefront of the public's mind. Journalists would visit his bedside, hoping for a deathbed confession. They wanted him to admit it was all just a ruse, to say, "You caught me, I just wanted a new life." They believed that in the face of death, a man would finally tell the truth, but Fritz Johnson never broke. He died on August 8, 1966, at the age of 39. To his very last breath, he maintained that he had no memory of Akron, no memory of Mary Lou, and no memory of the man named Larry Bader. His death created one final bizarre legal hurdle. Because he was legally Larry Bader, his death certificate had to be filed under that name, but the people of Omaha insisted on burying Fritz. In the end, his body was returned to Akron. The man who had tried so hard to leave that city behind was ultimately brought back to it, buried in a plot that had been waiting for him for 9 years. So we're left with the ultimate question: was he a fraud or a victim? Skeptics point to the timing. Larry vanished right when the IRS was closing in and his debts were peaked. He was a salesman, a man trained to read people and sell a personality. They argue that he simply sold Omaha in the character of Fritz Johnson. They point out that he was an amateur actor in Akron and that his amnesia was just his greatest performance. But then there's the medical evidence. Doctors who administered the true serum were convinced it is incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to maintain a complex lie under the heavy sedation of sodium amytal. Furthermore, why would a man try to hide from the law and his past become a television personality? If you're hiding, you don't put your face on every TV screen in the city. Most tellingly, there was the tumor. Modern neurologists who have been studying the case suggest that the malignancy behind the eye could have been pressing on his frontal or temporal lobes for years before it was diagnosed. A tumor in that location can cause profound personality changes, memory loss, and even identity replacement. It is possible that the stress of the storm on Lake Erie, combined with the physical pressure on his brain, caused Larry Bader's mind to snap, leaving Fritz Johnson to pick up the pieces. Larry Bader lived 2 lives, had 2 wives, and died twice. Whether he was a brilliant con artist who escaped the ultimate pressure, or a man who truly lost himself in the waves of Lake Erie, remains a secret he took to his grave. The man with the eye patch left behind a legacy of unanswered questions, reminding us that the most mysterious territory on Earth isn't a deep lake or a distant city, it's the human mind. While the fugue state and the con artist theories are the most common, they don't explain every detail. In the decades since his death, several darker, more complex theories have emerged from the fringes of the case. Theory 1. The mob debt and the clean slate. In the 1950s, Akron and nearby Cleveland were hotbeds for organized crime. While official records cite an IRS debt of $20,000, some investigators whispered that Larry's financial troubles weren't just with the government. What if Larry owed money to the Cleveland syndicate? In the world of 1950s bookmaking and loan sharking, $20,000 was a death sentence. Some believe Larry didn't just run from the IRS, but to a new identity provided by someone with the power to erase a man. This would explain how he arrived in Omaha with a completely new look and personality so quickly. Was Fritz a character created by the mob to hide a valuable association? Theory 2. The MK Ultra connection. This sounds like science fiction, but the timing is hauntingly perfect. The late 1950s was the height of the CIA's MK Ultra program, a series of clandestine experiments into mind control, memory erasure, and identity replacement using drugs like sodium amytal and LSD. Larry Bader was a Navy veteran. Some theorists suggest that his disappearance in a storm, a high-stress environment, was the perfect cover for a government experiment. They point to the true serum test in 1965. Why were the results so perfect? Why did he show zero physiological response when shown photos of his children? Skeptics of the medical results argued that Larry wasn't a natural amnesiac, but a reprogrammed one. Theory 3. Mary Lou. One of the most controversial theories involves his first wife, Mary Lou. To the public, she was the grieving widow, but some theorists ask, did she know? If Larry stayed in Akron, the family was headed for bankruptcy, prison from tax evasion, and social ruin. If Larry died, Mary Lou got a $40,000 tax-free windfall, enough to pay the debts and raise the children in comfort. Larry had increased his life insurance policy shortly before he had vanished. But if they were in on it together, why would he resurface as a TV star? The theory suggests that Fritz's persona was never supposed to get famous. Larry was supposed to be a quiet bartender in a Midwest town, but his natural ego was too big to stay hidden. His fame wasn't part of the plan, it was the mistake that blew the cover. Theory 4. The second man on the boat. Witnesses at the Rocky River dock saw Larry leave alone. However, some believe he didn't stay alone. A second boat or a person waiting further down the shoreline picked Larry up. This explains why the boat was found with one oar missing and a small hole in the hull. A man drowning in a storm doesn't usually take an oar with him, but a man needing to scuttle a boat or signal another vessel might. If Larry had an accomplice, it explains how he traveled 700 miles to Omaha in just 4 days without a car, a suitcase, or a trail. Theory 5. The tipping point. Perhaps the most terrifying theory isn't about mobs or spies, it's about the tipping point. Modern psychologists have looked at the case and proposed that Larry Bader didn't choose to forget, but he did choose to leave. They suggest he stayed Larry long enough to get to Omaha, but once he arrived, the stress of the crime of leaving his family caused his mind to fracture. He didn't just lie about being Fritz, he became Fritz to protect himself from the guilt of what he had done. It wasn't a medical fugue, it was a self-imposed illusion that became so real, even his own DNA couldn't remind him of the truth. Theory 6. Maybe they were 2 different people. Up until now, we've operated on one absolute truth, that Fritz Johnson and Larry Bader were the same man. The fingerprints matched, the family recognized him, and the law accepted it, but there is a small vocal group of researchers who propose a theory that is perhaps even more unsettling than amnesia. What if Fritz Johnson was never Larry Bader? In 1965, the world viewed fingerprinting as an infallible godlike science, but we have to remember the era. This wasn't a digital database scan, it was a manual comparison done by human eyes. Critics of the match suggest that the pressure to solve this high-profile case was immense. The insurance companies wanted their money back, and the police wanted a tidy ending to a cold case. Is it possible there was an administrative error or even deliberate tampering to ensure the prints matched? In the pre-DNA era, if the fingerprints said you were someone else, you had no way to prove otherwise. We also have to look at the psychology of the identification. When Susan Pica saw Fritz in Chicago, she was looking for her lost uncle. When Larry's brothers flew in, they were looking for their lost brother. There is a phenomenon where people who are grieving or seeking closure will subconsciously fill in the blanks when they see a resemblance. Fritz was a barrel-chested, flamboyant man, characteristics Larry never had. But the family explained this away as a personality change. What if they weren't seeing a changed Larry, but a man who simply looked remarkably like him? If Fritz was an orphan or a man with a murky past of his own, he might have been claimed by a family that desperately wanted their tragedy to have a happy ending. If Fritz wasn't Larry, who was he? If Fritz was an imposter, he was the most committed one in history. He died without ever slipping up, without ever recognizing a childhood friend, and without ever displaying a single Akron-specific memory. If the science of 1965 was wrong, it means 2 men's lives were destroyed by a coincidence of facial features and a mistake in the lab. It would mean the real Larry Bader truly did die in Lake Erie, and an innocent man named Fritz Johnson spent his final years being hounded for the debts of a stranger. But the conversation has just began. The mystery can also be yours to solve. What do you think happened to Larry Bader? Leave your thoughts, theories, and lore in the comments below, or drop a comment if there's a case, cryptid, or unexplained phenomena that keeps you up at night. And it might just be featured in our next deep dive. If you haven't already, make sure to like the video, subscribe if you enjoy the dark, the scary, and the unexplained. Hit that bell icon so you never miss a new video. Videos get dropped 2 to 3 times per week. Thank you for venturing into the dark with me. The world is full of things we cannot explain, but together we can keep looking for the answers. Until next time, my fellow spooky lovers, and remember, the truth is often hidden by night. Bye!